Ladies and gentlemen, Blake Wheeler is a New York Ranger for the low cost of just 1 year and $800,000. We debate on today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers whether or not he could be the absolute steal of this free agency season. Plus, our new deals on the way for Alexis Lafreniere and or K'Andre Miller. All this and much more on today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers.
You're Locked On the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 863 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And so obviously a lot has happened in the past 24 hours or so. I mean, the headline grabber for sure was Blake Wheeler coming to the Rangers once again at the low cost of 1 year, $800,000. That is only $25K over the league minimum for a player that, has been an all-star in the past, been a very, very good player for the Jets over the years. Obviously, he's gotten a little bit older. Going to be 37 before the season starts, but we're going to discuss Blake Wheeler in great detail today. And yesterday, we did a live episode on Saturday, and just kind of reacted in real time to the Rangers signing this guy, signing that guy. And obviously, I shared my initial thoughts on Blake Wheeler, but for today, want to dive into it. I've had some time to kind of think about it and how is Blake Wheeler going to fit in with this Ranger team? Who might his line mates be? Will he get some power play time, et cetera, et cetera? We will get to that in today's episode. But I do want to do a quick roll call of all the free agents that the New York Rangers have signed for the first about 24 hours here, give or take, of the free agency period. 9 of them happened on Saturday, and it seems like there's one more here on Sunday. But the 10 players, you got Blake Wheeler, 1 year, $800K. Jonathan Quick, 1 year, $825K. Right winger Tyler Pitlick, 1 year, $787.5K. I think maybe the Rangers are looking at him as perhaps, and I don't want to upset anybody here, but perhaps a more affordable, less expensive version of Tyler Mott. They might see Tyler Pitlick as somebody that can come in and fill that role. You've also got center/right winger Alex Belzile, 2 years, $775K. And some of these guys, including Belzile, probably ticketed to start the season in the minors with the Hartford Wolfpack. But he's an interesting one. Didn't make his NHL debut until he was 29. Not a ton of upside, it would seem, but just a depth signing for the Rangers. You got center and right winger Riley Nash, who I do not believe played at all in the NHL this past season, but he signs a 2-year, $775K contract. He's somebody that also seems to be ticketed to start the season in the minors, but we will see. Obviously, that's why you have training camp in the preseason. You let these guys put their best foot forward and determine who's going to be on this roster to start the year. You've also got center and left winger Nick Bonino, 1 year, $800K. Bonino's bounced around to quite a few different teams. Believe won both Stanley Cups with the Penguins, the two most recent ones that they've won. But it sounds like he looks to be ticketed probably for the fourth line for the Rangers when the season starts. You've also got defenseman Connor Mackey for 1 year. I did not see the price for Mackey yet, although Cap Friendly does have him listed right now, at least, on the New York Rangers roster as opposed to being a minor league player, and we'll see how that shakes out to start the season. But yeah, Connor Mackey, 1 year, $775K. You've also got defenseman Nicholas, I don't know how to pronounce this, Brouillard. I'll work on that, as we start to get more used to him. He's the one guy that the Rangers signed, I think the only player of the 10 that has never appeared in an NHL game, but he looks to be ticketed to start the season in the minor leagues for sure. 1 year, $775K for him. Then you've also got defenseman Eric Gustafsson, another guy, journeyman player, has bounced around the league quite a bit, does have some familiarity with Peter Laviolette. Believe they were together for one season with the Caps. He comes in to the Rangers at 1 year, $825K, and would seemingly be in position to perhaps battle Zach Jones for the sixth defenseman spot. Ben Harper could be in the mix as well, but I would think Gustafsson is probably like, just a smidge ahead of Ben Harper and maybe just a smidge below Zach Jones, but we'll see how that plays out. And then finally, defenseman Mac Hollowell, 1 year, $775K. Has only played 6 NHL games. They were all last year with Toronto. But, overall, I think when you're looking at this as a whole, I realize it lacks the big names, the splashy names. I mean, Wheeler and Quick are both big names. But I think if you're looking at this objectively and you take into account the fact that the Rangers obviously have precious little cap space to work with, I think this is a very successful first 24 hours of free agency for Chris Drury. They weren't going to bring in the guys at the top of the list as far as the top free agents are concerned in free agency. They just weren't going to be able to afford it. And so they had to do some patchwork. They had to, sign some depth pieces and even some minor leaguers. And considering that that's what they were looking to do yesterday, I think they did a great job with it. And we all thought that Barclay Goodrow was going to be a cap casualty, would either be traded or bought out. That could still happen if there's another move that the Rangers want to make and they want to bring in some other free agent who's still out there. And, you move on from Barclay Goodrow in a trade or possibly a buyout, but I think a trade makes more sense. That could still happen. You never know. But as things stand right now, the Rangers are in pretty good shape to re-sign. The only things that they have left to do, really, the only two big things are re-signing Lafreniere and re-signing Miller. And we're going to take a look at that, the big picture there a little bit later in today's episode. But again, you didn't have a whole lot to work with if you're Chris Drury and the Rangers. And I think these are all, some pretty smart signings. They didn't bring in any true superstar players, obviously, but these are guys that I think in one way or another, for the most part, should be able to help the Rangers in this upcoming season. Give them a little bit more depth, maybe a little bit more depth in the bottom six than they've had, at least at the start of some of the more recent seasons. So, we'll see how that whole thing shakes out. But overall, yeah, I think this is a good day for the Rangers. And for Blake Wheeler, again, he's going to be mostly the focal point of today's episode. 1 year, $800K. Still doesn't even seem real to me. The contract does have another $300K in potential bonuses. And as a couple of you guys have pointed out to me, obviously he's still getting buyout money from the Winnipeg Jets. So that's nice. He can stuff his pockets even more. But be that as it may, Blake Wheeler, again, could have gotten more money in free agency. You have to think. You can't tell me that not a single team in this league was willing to go more than 1 year and or more than $25K over the salary cap for Blake Wheeler, whether he's getting older or not. It was funny yesterday because we did the live episode, and naturally Twitter, of all the days for Twitter to be barely functional, they have to do it on the day of free agency. And of course, Twitter started acting up maybe like an hour before free agency started. But a couple of you guys were keeping an eye on things, helping me out in the live chat. So thank you for everybody that did that. I found out basically from you guys. It wasn't even a reporter because, like I said, Twitter was all messed up yesterday. That's a whole story in and of itself. But you guys were kind of keeping me updated in real time as far as, that's a heck of a signing for this team. And as I mentioned, look, again, he's going to be 37 in August. He was never going to get the same kind of a contract that he's played for in the past. The contract that Blake Wheeler had just before, obviously, signing with the Rangers yesterday and before he was bought out of the final year of that contract, his most recent contract with the Jets was for 5 years at $8.25 million per season for a total of $41.25 million. Again, he was bought out of the final year of that, but the contract that he signed right before that one was all the way back in 2013, 2014. It was for 6 years at $5.6 million per season. So Blake Wheeler has made his money, and I think all this probably kind of explains, or at least helps to explain, why Blake Wheeler ended up, just signing the 1 year deal with the New York Rangers for $800K. And we're going to look into that a little bit deeper in just a second. I also want to discuss Blake Wheeler's role with the Rangers for this upcoming season. Who might his line mates be? Who might he have the most chemistry with? How will the Rangers look to deploy him on the power play units? You got to figure he'll be on one of the power play units. You have to figure. But we're going to discuss all that good stuff in just a second. First, though, we do have to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run, all in an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, we just want to go ahead. Thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And for the everydayers, you guys are definitely going to want to stick around. We're not going to rush through the free agent class. There's 10 players. I don't want to try to, I know we did the roll call at the beginning of the episode today, but I want to take our time talking about all these players, what teams they've played with, when they were at their best, what to expect from them this season, what kind of a role they could play with the Rangers, all that fun stuff. We still got the draft class to get through, and going to try to line up some crossover episodes as well. I want to talk to Harrison from Locked On Jets for sure to find out everything about Blake Wheeler, him losing his captaincy and really just everything that's gone on ever since he's been a member of the Winnipeg Jets and maybe even a member of the Thrashers. He was a member of the Atlanta Thrashers for half a year before they became the Jets. So definitely looking forward to that. We're working to set that up. But for right now, let's go ahead and keep our attention on Blake Wheeler. And again, I think everything that I was talking about just a couple of minutes ago helps to explain why Blake Wheeler was so willing to take such an inexpensive contract from the New York Rangers. We're talking about somebody who, for his career, has made more than $80 million playing hockey. That's not too shabby. And something else to consider, and we mentioned this briefly in our last episode, the live episode that we did, but Blake Wheeler, he's getting up there. We mentioned he will be 37 before the season starts. I know some Ranger fans have expressed some concern about that. I'm not really too worried about it because even if Blake Wheeler is not the player that he used to be, even if he doesn't even put up the kind of numbers this season that he did last year, you are still talking about somebody making just $25K north of the league minimum. And when you look at what other players were going for, the Rangers, any way you slice it, they got a steal when it comes to Blake Wheeler. But again, with Blake Wheeler, you don't know how much longer that he's going to get the chance to play. And with that being the case, he wants to go somewhere where he can win. And clearly, he was able to take less money to do that. And again, he's made a ton of money through his career. He's still getting some buyout money from the Jets. I understand all that. But there are players out there who are still just going to take the highest offer, no matter which team that comes from. And props to Blake Wheeler for going somewhere that clearly he wanted to go, which is the New York Rangers. And hopefully he can provide them some right-wing depth, which is something that they've lacked in recent years, and be a little bit of a stopgap. I don't know, once this season is over, will they re-up with Blake Wheeler on another one-year deal for another inexpensive contract? It's possible. We'll see what happens there. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But for the time being, at least for one season, Blake Wheeler is helping the Rangers in a position at right wing where they are very, very thin. One other thing that I want to mention, again, I mentioned this very briefly in yesterday's episode, but I want to kind of reiterate it here. Everything I just said, Blake Wheeler cut the Rangers a break. He came in at a huge discount. I know he's made a ton of money, but be that as it may, he took a huge discount to come to the Rangers. Let's give him more than like a period or two into this next upcoming season to decide whether this is a great season or whether he is completely and irredeemably washed up. Because, no matter whether you're Blake Wheeler, an older player, a younger player, a guy signing a short, inexpensive contract, a guy signing, a long-term big money deal, whoever you are, you're going to a new team. Typically, there is going to be at least a little bit of an adjustment period, getting used to a new city, a new fan base, a new coaching staff, your new teammates, a new system in some cases. It does take a little bit of time. Blake Wheeler's been with the Jets for, I think, 10 or 12 years now, whatever it was, a really long time. Let's give him a little bit of a chance this season before we all declare that he's washed up. And I include myself in this because we Ranger fans, we can all have knee-jerk reactions, at least from time to time. So let's try to do our best to make Blake Wheeler feel welcome. Let's give him a big ovation for anybody that's there on opening night. Let's let Blake Wheeler know that he's welcome here and he's appreciated as a member of this team. Definitely looking forward to seeing what he can do. As we also discussed, Jacob Trouba, obviously very, very tight with Blake Wheeler. The two of them played for all 6 years that Jacob Trouba spent with the Winnipeg Jets. The two of them reportedly became very close, and obviously that probably didn't hurt as far as, Blake Wheeler ultimately deciding that he wanted to come to the Rangers. He knows he's got at least one really close friend in the locker room. That friend just so happens to be the Ranger captain. And obviously, I'm sure the two of them will hit it off, as they obviously did in Winnipeg. And I got to think, you're a free agent. Again, no matter who you are, what your age is, how long your deal is, whatever the situation might be, having at least one really close friend on the team that you're going to, that's got to help at least a little bit. So that's obviously a good thing for Wheeler as well. As far as where Blake Wheeler fits in the lineup, I know a lot of people have been trying to figure this out, and a lot of people on Twitter kind of messing with the Ranger line combinations and trying to figure out what they might end up being. And I'm going to go ahead and throw out two different ideas here. And again, it's very difficult to determine this stuff really this early in the game. Obviously, the ink isn't even dry on the contract for some of these free agents. But I'm looking to go back to a line that the Rangers use very briefly last season, and that would be the top line, left to right, Lafreniere, Mika Zibanejad, Capo Caco. I thought the little amount of time that they spent together, they look good, and it's time to take the training wheels off the kids and see what they can do. Mika Zibanejad, while he's been a Ranger, has shown time and time again that he is more than capable of playing with different wingers. I mean, guys have really kind of come and gone. Guys move up and down the Ranger lineup all the time. The only thing that really stays a permanent fixture is that Mika Zibanejad is your top line center. And for obvious reasons there, he's a tremendous player and has shown the ability to be very adaptable and to work with different wingers. And I'd like to see he is Mika. I'd like to see Lafreniere and Kako get an opportunity with Mika Zibanejad to start this upcoming season. So you do that, then you go with a second line. I'm going to say in this instance, we'll go Panarin, Hedel, Wheeler from left to right. Then everybody's happy because all the kids are in the top 6, and you've kind of spread the wealth a little bit. We're going to have a pretty solid looking third line as well. But I do like the idea of Wheeler being on the Panarin line. Both of them are a little bit pass first. I mean, obviously they can both shoot it a little bit as well. But the thing about Wheeler is I think he's somebody that can win you some board battles, keep offensive zone possessions alive. We saw how much that Panarin and to a lesser extent Strome enjoyed playing with Jesper Fast when Fast was a member of the Rangers. That just seemed to click. I mean, you look at Jesper Fast and you don't really, at least not right away, see him as a top 6 forward. But you know what? He's been playing top 6 for the Canes. Jesper Fast would have loved to seen him come back to the Rangers. That's kind of a little side plot here. But, obviously Panarin has shown in the past that he can thrive with a player of that ilk, a grinding forward, a guy that's going to get in there and, do a little bit of the dirty work at least. And as we talked about in yesterday's episode, Wheeler doesn't really rack up a ton of hits, but, obviously really big guy, size and weight, both, and he can go in there. And like I said, win some pucks, keep some offensive zone possessions alive. And obviously the guy can pass. And, hopefully him and Panarin would click well together. And as far as Hedel being on the second line, as far as Trocheck, I just think it's time to take the training wheels off of Filip Hedel a little bit as well, throw him into the top 6. And then you end up with a pretty strong third line. And we've got on the third line, in this scenario, it would be from left to right, Kreider, Trocheck, and Goodrow. All those guys, bring something unique to the table. I thought Kreider and Trocheck, when they played together last year, it wasn't super often, but there were times where they were together. I think they ended up kind of figuring things out. It took them a while to build that chemistry, but I think they found it toward the end of last season. And Goodrow, I mean, we know he's a Swiss Army knife. He can play any position on any line, and he never really feels all that out of place. I prefer him in the bottom 6 over the top 6, but if you need him in the top 6 in a pinch, he can handle himself there as well. And that would leave you with a fourth line, presumably from left to right, of Vesey, Bonino, and Pitlick. And, obviously 2 new names and faces there, but that's a solid fourth line for the Rangers. I'm not sure if it's as good as the one that ended last season, but it's solid. And again, you've got guys, all 3 of them making 6 figures that I think can go out there and play some pretty good hockey for you. That's the first scenario. I think the more likely line combinations for the Rangers, though, I'm going to run through this one a little bit quicker. I get the feeling they end up sticking with Kreider and Mika together on the top line. Maybe put Kako there on the right wing. Kako played well with them last season. Second line, given that Trocheck is kind of the veteran, I think it might be a situation where it's his job to lose. So I think in that case, you go Panarin, Trocheck, Wheeler, and then you're probably looking at a third line of like Lafreniere, Hedel, and Goodrow. Goodrow can come do some of the dirty work for the kids. And the fourth line, once again, is still Vesey, Bonino, and Pitlick. Obviously, you got some options here, but I do, again, like the idea of Wheeler being with Panarin because he's 6'5", 225 pounds. He can use his body and his strength to win some of those pucks and do some of the dirty work for that line for Artemi Panarin. And as I mentioned, that did work in the past with Jesper Fast on the Panarin line. And, somebody that's going to go in and do some of the dirty work. The Rangers didn't really have a lot of players like that in the playoffs this past season, and it showed up in the last 5 games of that series. And so Wheeler's somebody that can do that. And they brought in a couple other guys that can do that as well. But for Wheeler, yeah, I think you're definitely looking at him being in a top 6 role, likely on the second line with Artemi Panarin. As far as the power play is concerned, you go a couple of different ways here. Obviously, you can put him on the top line if you want, the top power play unit. I get the feeling we're looking at a top power play unit to start the year of Panarin, Mika, Kreider, Fox, and Kako. I think it's time, like I said, take the training wheels off of some of these kids, give them an opportunity. And I like Kako playing with sort of the big 4 of the Ranger power play unit. And then for the second unit, you're probably looking at I would go Hedel, Lafreniere, Wheeler, and then 2 out of 3 of Trouba, Miller, and Trocheck. And that's a tough call. I kind of want to leave Trocheck out of there even though that might be a bridge too far. Trocheck was on the top unit for most of last year. I don't know about taking him off the power play in general. You could rotate guys a little bit too. And I'd also like to see a little bit more of an even split between the two power play units for the Rangers as far as time on the ice goes. But obviously, they got a lot of time to figure this out. And I do think one way or another, Blake Wheeler is certainly going to be a member of the Ranger power play unit. We'll just see who he's playing with and which unit that he happens to be on. One other thing that I wanted to mention here before we kind of move on to Lafreniere and Kakko and talking about some of the contracts that they might be looking at. Obviously, they're both RFAs, and that's the last couple of things on the checklist is to get them under contract. I want to try to alleviate the concern of any Ranger fans about this signing of Blake Wheeler, because there's going to be some people. He's over the hill. He's washed up. He's going to be 37 years old. He's slowing down. I saw somebody on Twitter say, "Oh, great, it's Bobby Holik 2.0." Let's hope not. The difference is Holik got like a decent contract from the Rangers. Blake Wheeler got 1 year and $800K. So, as far as like the reasons why people maybe don't want Wheeler, as we've mentioned in the past, the Jets are not a team that's known for having a strong locker room, not a lot of cohesion among some of the older players and some of the young players on that team. And that's something that we'll ask Harrison about when we do our crossover with Locked On Jets. And Wheeler was obviously the captain for some of that. So it's kind of like, okay, so what was going on there under Wheeler's watch? I guess if there are any Wheeler naysayers, that's something that you could point to. There might be some people that say that like Blake Wheeler's blocking the path of a young player, but come on. I mean, you got to fill out this roster somehow. And again, when you can get somebody of his caliber for just $25K over the league minimum, I think it's something that you have to do. I'd say it's a risk you have to take, but honestly, how much of a risk is it? Even if Blake Wheeler stumbles and is a shell of who he used to be, I mean, again, you have to fill out this roster somehow. And the Rangers did it yesterday by signing a bunch of guys who are making six figures at the most. They didn't sign a single player of the 10 guys that they signed that are making more than, I think, $825K. Nobody's making more than six figures. And Blake Wheeler is one of those players. Blake Wheeler last season, 55 points in 72 games, and you get him just $25K over the league minimum. That to me sounds like a job well done for the Rangers, and really nice signing here. And again, props to Blake Wheeler for wanting to chase the Stanley Cup late in his career. Obviously, that's something that he's never been able to do, lift the Stanley Cup, and hasn't never really gotten all that close. I think maybe just one time with the Jets, they made it to the Western Conference Finals, but he has never competed in the Stanley Cup final, and he'll at least have a shot this upcoming year with the New York Rangers. And if you're still not convinced about Blake Wheeler, the last thing I want to do here as it pertains to him is just give you a list of some of the UFAs from yesterday that have signed with new teams and give you some of the prices that they signed for. These are all players that ended up with a higher average annual value than Blake Wheeler. So we can start with Corey Perry. We mentioned him not too long ago, $4 million with the Blackhawks. Corey Perry getting more than 4 times more than Blake Wheeler. You've got Oliver Ekman-Larsson, $2.25 million from Florida. Teddy Bluger got $1.9 million from the Canucks. Milan Lucic got $1.5 million from Boston. Ryan Poling got $1.4 from Philly. Ryan Reeves, our old buddy, gets $1.35 million from the Leafs for 3 years. Ryan Reeves is 36 years old. And you know what? I'm happy for him because I think he did a nice job while he was here. I think he had a positive impact in that Ranger locker room, and then just kind of organically got squeezed out of the lineup. But if there's a team that needs more thump and more grit, it's definitely the Toronto Maple Leafs. So good on Ryan Reeves, for making that happen and getting himself a nice contract. Nathan Bashan got $1.35 million from the Devils. Kyle Burrows got $1.1 from the Sharks. Troy Stetcher got $1.1 from the Coyotes. Andreas Englund got $1 million from the Coyotes. And Kevin Stenlund got $1 million from the Panthers. I don't know who that is. I don't know that name. It's very rare that I'll see an NHL player and just be like, who's that? I have no clue who that is. I don't know who Kevin Stenlund is. Even he got more from the Panthers than Blake Wheeler got from the Rangers. So again, the price was right. And to me, a little bit of risk given the fact that he's older, but a risk well worth taking when you consider the price tag. And the fact that, again, the Rangers are very, very thin at right wing. And also the fact that their options were very limited due to, obviously some tight cap restraints that they currently have. We're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. Want to turn our attention to Alexis Lafreniere and K'Andre Miller. Talk briefly about, what might be next for them and what kind of contracts that they might be looking at. Because like I said, that's pretty much the last thing on the checklist for Chris Drury. or so it would seem in this free agency period. Also, want to talk a little bit about other Ranger UFAs from this season that have signed with some other teams, and take a quick look at the list of Ranger UFAs who, at least as of now, remain unsigned in free agency. We're gonna do all that good stuff in just a second. All right, so Alexi Lafreniere, Keandre Miller, the last two, really important. I mean, Vladimir Tarasenko, Patrick Kane, they're important, but I think they're UFAs. Lafreniere and Miller are RFAs. Obviously, we're expecting Lafreniere and Miller back, or barring any trade or anything like that. And then there's guys like Kane and Tarasenko who we're not expecting back. But yeah, the Rangers, look, again, they went to the dollar store in free agency. I think they did the best they could with the limited cap space that they had. And now you're in a spot where the Rangers, after all the signings that they made, projected to have $6.925 million in cap space left to get new contracts to Lafreniere and Miller. That should be more than enough. You don't want to be right up against the salary cap at this time of the season because cap space does accrue while the season goes. And obviously, the more cap space you can accrue heading into the trade deadline, the better players and the more expensive players that you can bring in at that time if you're looking to make a move or two come trade deadline time. And as we've seen in recent seasons, Rangers have been very, very active at the trade deadline. So with all that said, we can go ahead and look at Lafreniere first. When you look at the fact that Kakko last offseason got a 2-year bridge deal for $2.1 million per season, I'm thinking something in that ballpark feels about right, feels about fair for Alexi Lafreniere. Maybe you're looking at like 2 years, $2 million per season, $2.2 million per season. I think Kakko has slightly better numbers, or did have slightly better numbers in his first 3 years than Lafreniere did. So you can kind of use that as a comp if you're the Rangers. And RFAs, you're kind of handcuffed. There's only so much leverage that you have, which is to say not much leverage at all. The team basically holds all the cards. And I think, Lafreniere, 2 years, $2 million per season. That sounds about right. That sounds about fair. For Keandre Miller, I feel like maybe you can use Ryan Lindgren as a little bit of a comp here. They have different skill sets, but in terms of just overall effectiveness, I think they're kind of in the same area. Again, it's kind of apples and oranges a little bit. But Ryan Lindgren a few years ago got 3 years at $3 million per season. Lindgren himself will be an RFA after this upcoming season. So, I can't be the only Ranger fan that really hopes that he's a long-term Ranger. Hopefully it's in the cards. But for Miller, yeah, I think something around what Ryan Lindgren got could be fair. Maybe you're looking at a 2-year bridge deal for Keandre Miller, somewhere in the vicinity of like $2.6 million per season, $3 million per season, $3.125 million per season, somewhere in that area. I think sounds about right for Keandre Miller. It's always difficult to project these kind of things, but I do think, again, different skill sets, but same amount of overall effectiveness from Keandre Miller and Ryan Lindgren. So I think using Lindgren as a comp for Keandre Miller does make some sense. And you guys have noticed in the past, you probably noticed in this free agency season, when I'm trying to project contract numbers, it feels like I tend to overshoot it a little bit. I tend to think that guys are going to get a little bit more than they end up getting. Obviously, that's very true with Blake Wheeler, although none of us could have seen him taking the discount to end all discounts. But yeah, my reasoning is always that, there's 32 teams out there. When it comes to free agency, the most highly sought after players, there's going to be multiple suitors, and they're going to go back and forth and try to give the best offer that they can give. And I just feel like eventually, for the top free agents, somebody's eventually going to have to overpay to separate themselves from the pack. For situations like this, though, with new contracts, same thing. I tend to overshoot it a little bit, but I think those numbers I just came up with for Miller and Lafreniere, once again, are fair. That's assuming that the Rangers don't trade either player. I feel like if one of them is going to be traded, it will and probably should be Keandre Miller. But again, there's no reason to trade either player. You went to the dollar store in free agency. You've saved yourself all this cap space. You've got nearly $7 million in cap space, more than enough to get both these guys under contract. And maybe even another inexpensive signing for the Rangers in free agency. We will see. I figure, we're talking about free agency. That's obviously been the theme for the last couple of episodes here. Rightfully so. Always a very exciting time of the season. But I thought we could go ahead and take a look at the Ranger UFAs who have signed elsewhere in free agency. And as of right now, not a ton of movement, The only guy who's a UFA for the Rangers who ended the season last year on the Ranger NHL roster is Nico Mikkola. He is now officially an ex-Ranger. He signs with the Florida Panthers. He gets 3 years at $2.5 million per season, which sounds about right for him. Maybe that's a tad expensive for Mikola. Not a superstar, but obviously a very solid defenseman. Got a lot of size and a lot of strength and brings some good things to the table. I thought Mikola did a nice job as a sixth defenseman for the Rangers last year, coming over with Tarasenko. But I'll say now what I said right from the moment that trade was struck. Mikola always felt like a rental for this team. He was going to be a little bit too expensive in free agency. And yeah, there's no way the Rangers could spend 3 years at $2.5 million a pop on their sixth defenseman, especially when the Rangers have some young defensemen who you would have to think they eventually want to give the job to, and for a far lesser price. You've also got Tim Gettinger. He signs with the Detroit Red Wings, a 1-year deal. It's a 2-way contract at the league minimum, $775K. Gettinger didn't play with the Rangers this past year. Played at least a couple of games with them for the 4 games before that. Did okay when he was up as a fourth liner. Big guy. But somebody that I just don't think the Rangers really have any room for. And if you're Gettinger, having spent the whole past season in the minors, I'm sure you probably want to go somewhere else and give it a crack there. And he goes to the Detroit Red Wings. Then you've also got Wyatt Kalynuk. He signs with the Blues, 1 year, 2-way contract for $775K. And as far as Ranger free agents that remained unsigned, Tarasenko, Kane, Halak. I mean, Halak's not going to be back. We know that because they signed Jonathan Quick. And Tarasenko and Kane both seem like long shots, especially Tarasenko. I don't even know what you would have to do to fit in Tarasenko at this point. Tyler Mott is still out there. Ryan Carpenter, CJ Smith, William Lockwood, Libor Hayek, Patrick Kodorenko, and Cooper Zek. There were reports that Patrick Kane is reportedly in no hurry to sign with anybody. He's going to kind of play the long game here. So we'll see how that whole thing shakes out. Never say never. It's possible he could be back with the Rangers. But if he is, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. And definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, at @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's at @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.